This is Gemara in Yevamos, Daf Gimel, learning for this month. The month of Adar Sheni has been generously sponsored as a Schos Ili Neshama for Rav Shlomo ben Rav Meir in conjunction with the release of the new Sefer Baruch Hashem, the laws of Chanukah and Purim. I'm sure many of you by now have seen it and have it. Mirz Hashem, learning of the Sefer, learning of the Daf together, should bring an incredible Aliyah Neshama to Rav Shlomo ben Rav Meir as the Ayla to a higher and higher place in Gan Eden Shel Meila. So holding on, bees, Amid bees, we survived the first Mishnah. Baruch Hashem. And today we're going to begin the Gemara. Just one technical announcement. If everyone could please, if you'd like to continue us learning those Chos Yerchelim or Shidduch, etc., please send an email. We're going to try to wipe the slate clean and start again so that we make sure we are current and up to date. But before we begin the Gemara, yesterday in the first year we ran into a slight issue. In case number 10 and 11, Achois Me'imai and Achois Imai, I had a little bit of a technical situation. The problem was I didn't have the picture and that threw me off. So I'd just like to take one moment and just learn these two cases together for the Mishnah. Achois Me'imai, the maternal sister, and Achois Imai, the sister of one's mother. And the basic difference, as you see over here in case number 10, this one I believe we explained properly, is Achois Me'imah, the maternal sister, is if Avram and Sarah had children from previous marriages, and then Avram and Sarah have a child together, Shimon, if those children from previous marriages get married, they're completely unrelated, that's not a problem. So Reuven marries Leah. When Reuven is Nifter, now the brother Shimon falls to Yibam to Leah. The problem is Shimon and Leah are related. It's a maternal sister in the fact that Leah's mother Sarah is actually Shimon's mother Sarah, and therefore that is one of the arayas in the Mishnah. Achois Me'imai. Case number 11 is Achois Imai, which in this case is completely different. Again, apologies. I believe this was one that we messed up yesterday. Is that in this case again, Avram had a kid from a previous marriage, Reuven, and Reuven marries Leah. Who is Leah? Leah is Avram's new wife's sister. Avram's new wife's sister. And then when Reuven is Nifter, Shimon is now going to fall to Yibam to his mother, because Shimon is born from Avram and Sarah, to his mother's sister, Achois Imai, and that's going to be a problem. And with that, let's go straight into the Gemara. Bezim and says the Gemara. Michti. Let's see. Kulu me up. Here we go. Let's get the highlighting up and running. Apologies. Mechdi, let's see. Kulu me Achois Isha Yalfino. We learn out everything in the Mishnah from Achois Isha, from one's wife, sister. Listen to Achois Isha Berisha. If that is the prototypical case, is Achois Isha, why isn't that the first case of the Mishnah? And this is going to be one of those technical Gemaras trying to figure out the order of the Mishnah. So why is it Achois Isha first? Perhaps you're going to suggest on a Chomer Nakat, maybe the Mishnah listed in order of severity, who is a more usher, the more strict and severe punishment, the Rav Shimoni, and we're going at the opinion of Rav Shimon. Who is Rav Shimon? Rav Shimon holds the Sreiva Chamura, big machlekes. What is the most strict of all death penalties? Is it Sreifa or Skila? Rav Shimon holds Skreifa. When one is burned to death, that is the most severe. And so maybe that's the reason why the Mishnah listed in the order that it listed. Let's just get the Rashi over here. Rashi points out, Rav Shimoni, the Amar Perik Dalad Misa is a famous sheet of Rav Shimon in Sanhedrin. We're listening at the Rashi for a moment, 6 lines on the bottom of the Amid. Sreiva Chamura, Ulahachi Tana Reisha Bitay Ubas Bitay. So why did it list daughter and granddaughter first? Kulu Ad In Chama, because those are all Sreifa. So maybe the Mishnah is going in order of severity, so therefore, and we're going to opinion Rav Shimon, therefore Bitay comes first. But the Gemara therefore says, can't be, Achi, 4 lines on the bottom, listen to Chamaisai Bereisha. Why not? Because then Chamaisai, the mother-in-law, should have come first. The Iker Sreifa Bechamasai. Don't take those words out of context. That the Iker Sreifa, the Iker punishment of Sreifa is if one is with his mother-in-law Ksiva. That is where it's written. So if you're going to tell me we're going by severity, Sreifa most Chamer, Shitas Rav Shimon, who should have been first? Chamasai, mother-in-law. Why does the Mishnah list Bitay? Question number 1. Va'oi. Question number 2. Pazar Chamasai. After when Chamasai in the Mishnah, what should have listed? Listing kolasai. Should have listed daughter-in-law. Why? The boss says Sreifa skila chamura. Because even if you hold like Rav Shimon, that Sreifa is most chamer, what's next? Skila, stoning. So the Mishnah should have first went into mother-in-law, then went into Kalasai, daughter-in-law for stoning. So there's issues with saying that the Mishnah has to do with Chomri Nakat, order of severity. Therefore, it says the Gemara Ella on the last line, Pitay, why is daughter first? Kiman da Asya Midrasha Chavivale. A classical concept that we have in Gemara is that something comes from a drasha, something which is not explicit in the Torah, but we had to work and sweat to learn it. It's a drasha that is most chaviv to us, that is most dear to us, and that is the reason why we list Pitay first. Says the Gemara on the top of Gimlam and Aleph. What do you mean? Kulunam midrasha asu. All of them, the entire Mishnah, all 15 of them, come from midrashim. The Gemara answers, you're right. By Yibum, with regard to this new invention of Yibum, like we spoke yesterday, usually it's also to marry. When it comes to Yibam, the new mitzvah, that is a drasha. But Iker Asurayu Behed. But the Iker Isser, all the other Isurim in the Mishnah are explicit Bahu. But Bita, a daughter, Iker Isura Midrasha, the Iker Isser, not only the heter, not only the chiddush, the novelty of Yibam, but the actual forbiddance, the actual transgression of Bita is learned out from a drasha. Rava, as Rava teaches us, this is actually a drasha that we had very recently in the Gemara Chagiga. Damar Rava, Amar Li, Rav Yitzchak bar Rav Dimi, Asya Heina Asya Zima Zima, a double drasha of Heina Zima Zima, and that is where we learn out Bita, daughter, and that is the reason why Bita is listed first in the Mishnah. Now we'll just take one moment and swing over to Rashi over here. Asya Heina, Rashi points out, we're not talking about a regular case of Bitai. We're talking, and Rashi says the reason is, the Bitai me Ishtai, v'chein bas Bita bas v'nei alfina me ervas isha Bita lo segalei. V'rei Bitai me Ishtai b'chlola bas Ishtai. Aval Bitai ma'anusasai, that's the case. Talking about a daughter that was born out of wedlock, when someone violates someone and has a daughter, if someone violates a woman and has a daughter, that daughter is what we're discussing. Isha, V'loshen Isha, it's not like they kedushin. The pasuk sounds like there's a real marriage mashma. V'goli rachman bas bita bas benoy manu sasai. When it's born from wedlock by Ikra, bas bincha bas bitcha. These sukkim, it's not out of a regular marriage. That's where we learn it out from. Vakati bita like sevhacha, fidam k'zir shavik sevhacha b'kra danusa gervas einicha heina b'ksiv krachrina diisha sheira heina mahasa bita kebas bita avacha bita kebas bita. That's the zima zima, and the Rashi continues teaches that's where we learn out the sreifa from, and that is the makar of a bita me'anusasai from the Mishnah. Says the Gemara, fine. So you got number one. The first one in the Mishnah is Bita. What about the rest of 14? Back into the Gemara 6 lines down. Now that you're telling me that whatever is learned out from a drasha is most chav and most dear to you, so now let's go. What should be last? The wife's sister should be last. Why? Because that is explicit. That's not a drasha. And therefore, that should have been listed last. Explains the Gemara, once we're talking about sisters, once we got into the parsha of sisters, therefore sister, the Achais Ishta's wife's sister came up. Says the Gemara 1 second, but let him teach that entire group of sisters last. Answers the Gemara, Latana Korva Nakan. And this is going to be the answer, how we get to the whole 15. Well, the Mishnah goes in order of Korva, the order of closeness, of relation to the person in the Mishnah. And therefore, Tana Bita Yabas Atzmai. Again, we start off with Bita, the daughter, the granddaughter from the son. Why? Because those are all your own personal relatives. We can actually refer to them as your blood relatives. Once we went 3 generations down from him, and we pointed down in the Mishnah that we first go 3 down from him, then what? Then we go 3 generations from her. And then after the first 6, Once you go into her, now you go up. So again, we went down, his 3, down, her 3. Once we're in her, now we go up her 3, and then and once we dealt with the immediate blood relatives of children, then we went into the maternal sister, and like we started off today's share discussing the Kroivei Atzmai, because again, that's another form of blood relative. It's not a child, but it's a sister. And then once we're discussing the sister, his wife's sister, it says the Gemara that really, what should be next? Really, the daughter-in-law, Kalasai, should have come before the case of Ishes Achiv, Shlaya Balama, the case where he wasn't born yet and he was only born after the brother died. Delay Misham Korbu, it's nothing to do with the relative. The Isura, Ela Aidi, the Iri, Beisra Achva. But you know why we listed it? Because once we were on the topic, once we started listing the sisters, Tani Ishes Achiv, Shlaya Balama, we dealt even with the case of the one that wasn't in the world yet, Father Tani Kalasai, then we went to daughter-in-law, and that is the reason, that's how we get Father Tani Kalasai, and that is how we have the 15 cases in the Mishnah. Before we continue, just another beautiful picture by Daf Chaim. Again, all these resources are on their website, dafchaim.com or org, but you'll find it. Over here, just it goes through and it breaks down the 15. You can just very visual, you could picture it. This teretz of the Gemara of Korvei Nakat, as you see, the first group is Bitay Bas Benai, is your own personal blood relatives. Then it goes into the woman, Bas Ishtay Bas Bina, Bas Bita. So we go down him, we go down her, and then we go up, Chamasai, Vim Chamav, and then we go into Kroivei Atzmai, which is the sisters, is Achaisai v'Achais Imai. Once you're in sisters, we go Achais Ishtay. Once you're in Achais Ishtay, it's just Acham Imai, and then finally and now we get back to the Gemara. Says the Gemara, fine. So we now know the 15. Pitai all the way to Kalasai, why the 15 were in that order. But there's other words in the Mishnah we want to deal with. The Chamesh Esei Nashim Shepoitrei Saris Saraseim Min HaYibum Umin HaChalitza. Every word we're going to zone in on right now. Says the Gemara, Umay Ayre the Tani Poitrais. Chamesh Esei Nashim Poitrais. They pater, they exempt their Sarais, the wives and the co-wives from Yibum and Chalisa. Listening Israis. Why use the word exempt? Just say it's Aser, that the co-wives are not allowed to marry, they're not allowed to do Yibum and Chalisa. Says the Gemara, you know why? Because Itani Israis, if it would have said Israis, what would I have thought? Havamina Asa Liyabim. There's an Isser. It's forbidden to do what? To do Yibum. But I would have thought, you're allowed to do Chalitza. So Kamashman, and therefore we said, Paitrais. Says the Gemara, 1 second. But listening, Asura Lachlaitz. So why did the Mishnah say, Paitrais, Minai Chalitza, Minai Yibum? Let it just say, it's Asur to do Chalitza. Says the Gemara, an interesting retortion. Micah Ovid, what do you mean Asur? The word Asur, it's forbidden, means you did something. So my Asur, what does the word Asur have to do with Chalitza? Chalitza isn't doing something, it's undoing something. You have some sort of relation, some sort of connection with the brother's wife, and you're severing that connection via Chalitza. So says the Gemara, how can you call that Oisrais? Micah Ovid, what are you doing? Says the Gemara back. 10 lines to the bottom, the first one line is Alama. Alama lai, not Alma. Alama with a hay at the end. Alama lai. Why not? What's the problem? You know what you're doing? That if you would have done Chalitza, you would have been done Yibum. So there is an act of doing that's going on over here. So says the Gemara, you know why the Mishnah used the word Paitrais min Chalitza min Yibum? Only when there's a potential mitzvah, there's a relationship. That's when the tzara, the co-wife, is forbidden. But when there's no relation, there's no potential mitzvah, sharia, then they're allowed to do yibum echalitza. Therefore, we use the word paitrais that it's exempt. Only these cases are exempt. And in a moment, we'll show again Daf Chaim at a beautiful visualization point this out. Let's get there one moment. But the Gemara continues 8 lines on the bottom. Why does it say pointers min chalitza min yibum? It's funny. Chalitza then yibum. Why listening min yibum lechudei? Just saying you're exempt from doing yibum. Answers the Gemara, just would have said from Yibum, Hava Amina Michlatz Chalta Yibum Lamiyama. I would have thought your brother from Yibum. Okay, so do Chalitza. Kamash Mala, and so the Mishnah is teaching us a rule. Kol Oile Yibum Oile Chalitza. Choshein Oile Yibum Oile Chalitza. That they go hand in hand. That when there's Yibum, there's Chalitza. When there's Chalitza, there's Yibum. But it's not mutually exclusive of each other. Says Gemara, great, but why mina chalitza u mina yibum? Save a listi, mina yibum, mina chalitza, but yibum first 4 lines from the bottom. Inami, mina chalitza lichuda. Or just a chalitza, and I would know. If there's no chalitza, there's no yibum. Answers the Gemara, fascinating teretz. Abba Shali, the Mishnah, why did the Mishnah say chalitza first? To show us we're going to the opinion of Abashal, the Amar, what does Abashal hold? Mitzvahs, chalitza, koidemis, the mitzvah yibam. When you are posed with an option, do chalitza, do yibam, it's better to do chalitza, says Abashal. And that's why the Mishnah says, mina chalitza, mina yibam. Now, why is it better to do chalitza? Let's look at Rashi. Rashi, 2 lines to the bottom says, as we're going to see later on in Daf Lametes, Abashal, if someone gets married, if someone marries a random woman for beauty purposes or for stam, he wants to get married, it's not forbidden. He might not have a great marriage, but it's not forbidden. But if someone does yibum, says Abba Shal, l'shem noi, l'shem ishus, listen to these words. Ki'ilu, it's as if on the last line of the Amud, poigeya be'erva. It's as if he got married to an erva, be'karoi be'inai, liyos avlan mamzer. And the child is almost not a real mamzer, but it's almost like a mamzer. Abba Shal holds that because chalitza, because yibum is a chiddush hatayra, going back to the shir from yesterday, because it's a novelty. How could one marry? They were related. All of a sudden the brother dies down, he children, and now his wife is allowed to marry her ex-husband's brother. Usually it's forbidden. The Chiddush HaTorah of Yibum allows this woman to marry her ex-brother-in-law. Now it's allowed. So, but that needs kavanah, says Abba Shal. You can't just get married over there. It's only going to be allowed if you're doing it for the right purposes. If you're doing it for l'shem noi, l'shem ishus, it says if it's an aveira and it's going to be a vlad mamzer. Let's just take one moment and just look at this picture over here. Again, because hopefully as we get more and more of these cases, we'll get more familiar. The Gemara just said, why did we use the word paitrais? So the Gemara said that the word paitrais teaches us that it's only b'makay mitzvah is when the tzara is aser, but shaloi b'makay mitzvah it's mutter. So now let's just see this relationship over here between makay mitzvah and shaloi b'makay mitzvah. On the right side, I think we'll come up on the right side. Or maybe on the left side, so I'm not going to try. The Makay mitzvah it's aser. What's Makay mitzvah? Again, the classical case, Reuven and Shimon. Reuven is married to Sarah, which is his brother's daughter, and then no, incorrect. Shimon is married to Sarah, thank you, which is Reuven's daughter, and then Shimon has another wife, Rivka. When Shimon dies, Sarah and Rivka fall to Ibn to Reuven, and just like Sarah cannot marry Reuven, Rivka cannot marry Reuven because it's a Sarah. But this is only b'makay mitzvah because there was a potential yibum over here. Because Reuven and Shimon are brothers. So when Shimon was nifter, what happens? His wives fall yibum to his brother only because it's a potential mitzvah which cannot be actualized. Why not? Because Sarah is related to Reuven, b'itay, therefore Rivka, the co-wife, cannot get married either. But shaloi b'makay mitzvah. Look at the next picture. Let's say there's a guy Nachshain, he's not related, and he has 2 wives, Sarah and Rivka. One of his wives happens to be Reuven's daughter. So when Nachshain is nifter, it's true. Sarah cannot marry Reuven. Why not? Because it's her father. But could Rivka, who's Sarah's co-wife, marry Reuven? Of course. There's no relationship over here. It's only in a potential case of Yibam is the Sarah forbidden, and that's where the word paitrais in the Mishnah comes to teach us. Absolutely beautiful. Let's get back into the Gemara. It is getting late. Says the Gemara more into the wordage of the Mishnah, Minyan de Reish L'Mutei Mai, Minyan de Sefer L'Mutei Mai. The Chamish Esrei Nashim. Why 15? Whenever we have a number, it's coming to exclude something. And Minyan de Sefer, everyone's wondering, there's no other meaning in the Sefer. So look at the last Rashi. Rashi says, when the Mishnah says, Harei Elu Paitrais, is also Mashma Elu V'Sulai. It also sounds like, at some level, it's like you wrote a number. So what is that coming to exclude? Says the Gemara, you know what to do. Numbers in the Mishnah are coming to exclude Lem'utei, the Rav, Udravasi. It's coming to exclude 2 cases, the case of Rav and the case of Ravasi. Now, Rav and Rav Asi are two cases in which we're going to get to in about a week's time. As you see in the Tab Rashi over here, Rashi teaches us that Rav is Saras Saita and Rav Asi is Saras Ailinus, and these are two cases which are not part of the Mishnah. So I'll explain them briefly because we're going to get to them later on. But Rav, let's look at Rashi and he explains it that if a woman is mizana, the halacha is of a saita, it's asura libal, vasura libayil. If Rivka is mizana, she's not longer allowed to stay married to her husband, nor is she allowed to stay married to the person she was mizana with. But the question is, let's say the husband dies. And then, as look at Rashi, and he dies, the question is, they now fall to Yibam. But is this a case of an Erva falling to Yibam? In the Mishnah, in all the cases of the Mishnah, like the case of Bitai, when the brother died, when Shimon died, and the daughter falls Yibam to Ruvain because it's a father-daughter relationship, they can't do Yibam, so the other wives can't either. So the question is, what about a Saita? Is a Saita a similar type of case? Because Asur Labalva, Asur Labayil. There was also an Isser over there. So the Mishnah lists, Chamesh Esri Nasha teaches only these cases. These are the cases of Erva in which they cannot do Yibam and Chalitza, nor can the Tzarais, the co-wives, coming to exclude a case of a saita that you would, be able to do Yibam to the Sarah, to the co-wife. Similarly, the Rav Asi holds that Sarah Ailinus. What's an Ailinus? Ailinus is a woman that can never have children. So Rav Asi holds Saras Ailinus Asura is forbidden. Why? If you're married to an Ailinus and has another wife, says Rashi the last night. Why? Lunchtime, Baturas for Tarayah, Bepirkin, they're both pater, and our Mishnah is going to say no. Our Mishnah is going to hold that an Ailinus is not going to be an exclusion. So the Mishnah listed Chamesh Asri Nashim and concluded Hari Elu, only these, to say not like Rav and not like Rav Asi. Says the Gemara, okay, great. So the Mishnah we understand. But according to Rav and Rav Asi themselves, they hold that there is a patur in these cases. There is an exemption from Yibam and Chalitza. So what does the number of the Mishnah come to exclude? Answers the Gemara, if Rav and Rav Asi hold of each other, so now we need to find two cases. The one case with Teisara Ma'anes. Again, something that we're going to learn later in the Besechta. Miyun is whenever there's kedushin of a katan. We have a girl who's not of age, she's a child, she marries someone, halacha is, she's allowed to walk out of that marriage and say, I don't want this miyun. Now, what happens if her husband dies, now she falls to Yibam? Is there a Yibam in Chalitz over here? The halacha is no. Because it wasn't a real connection, she only was a kedusha katan, only kedusha derabanan. When she falls to Yibam to the brother, she is going to have to chalitza not yibam. So according to Rav and Rav Asi, the Mishnah comes to exclude that case. Again, someone that was either someone who remarried his divorcee, which is allowed until you marry someone else. If someone gets divorced and marries another person, they're not allowed to be machzer their gusha. If someone did that, that's going to be the case that the Mishnah is coming to exclude. And if Rav and Rav Asi do not hold of each other, then one is coming to exclude their friend, meaning Rav and Rav Asi, Rav Asi and Rav. Beautiful. Says the Gemara, but 1 second. According to Rav and Rav Asi, why did the Mishnah list their cases? If they believe that the din of the Mishnah of Paitrei Saras is Sarasein applies to their case of what? Saras Saita, Saras Ailinus, why didn't the Mishnah list it? Answers the Gemara, you know why? Lefi, because She'ena b'tzara Sarah. It only applies to the tzara, to one level of co-wife. It does not apply to the co-wife's co-wife, and that is why the Mishnah does not list it. Fine, so we finished the Mishnah, we finished the analyzation of the Chamesh Asri Nashim, of the word Paitris, of the Chalitza before the Yibam, of what Chamesh Asri is coming to exclude, what Harei Elu is coming to exclude. Now says the Gemara, let's go fundamental. Minna, Hani, Mili. Where does the din in the Mishnah apply that any time we have an Erva, we have a Bita, we have a daughter, not only is she pater from Yibam, but the Tzara, the co-wife is pater, the co-wife's co-wife is pater, etc. Where do we know that from? The Tana Rabbana we learned in a Braisa. Isha lachaisa l'sikach l'sar l'galis erva. Says in the Torah that a woman should not take a woman and her sister l'galis erva sa in order to uncover her nakedness, literally allow upon her b'chayeha in her lifetime. Aleha upon her, maitam lama. What is that word needed for? Lafish, never, because the Torah says Yevama Yava Yaleha. By Yibam, he uses that same word that you should yes get married to the woman. Shameani, I learn from there. Afilu ba'achlis b'kol arayis amuris b'Torah. Any of the case of arayis, hakasam medaber. The pasuk is talking. So nemar kana lel, v'nemar lahalon lel. The word aleha is used in both cases to teach me ma lahalon b'makei mitzvah, avkan b'makei mitzvah. They're both potential case of mitzvah of Yibam v'chalita, and yet v'amar achmanu loisikach. Says the Torah, still do not get married because there is a relationship over here. Ve'inli Elohi, that only teaches me she herself you cannot get married to her. Why not? Because there's some level of erva over here. Again, Yibam is only allowed in the case of brother-in-law. That's also a potential erva. That's the Chiddush HaTorah. Again, Reuven and Shimon. Shimon was married to a woman. When Shimon dies, that woman does Yibam to Reuven. Even though normally that woman is not allowed to marry Reuven. You're not allowed to marry your husband's brother. But the Chiddush HaTorah is Yibam allows it. That's only that case. All other arvos, all other arayis is forbidden, says the Gemara. That's what we just learned. But that's only he. Tarasa minayin. How do we know the Kohet? Tamlamer litzrar. Says the Basik litzar. Ainli ela tarasa. Sarah, minayin. How do we know two levels? Tamlamer litzrar v'loy lotzor. V'inli alachais isha. How do we know the first case of achais isha? Shar rais minayin. How do we know the other 15 cases of the Mishnah? Amrit ma'achais isha. And by the way, now you see that achais isha is the most explicit. That goes back to Amar Aleph in the whole list of the Mishnah. But says the Gemara, Amrit ma'achais isha miyuchedes. It's a special case. What's special about achais isha? Number one, she erva. Number two, v'chayav al zdoina karis is the punishment of karis. Number three, if it was amazing. Number three, if you did that here by accident, there's a chatos. Number four, and what? Not number four, because those three things, what do they equal? Vasur liyabim, you're not allowed to do yibam. Avkol, anytime you have these three items merging together, will equal an iser yibam. Avkol shiyarva, number one, v'chav nazon karis, if it's amazing, it's a karis, al shekos a chatos, asur liyibam will result in iser yibam. So that's how we know that Sarah. Ve'in liyala Sarah seihen, ve'in liyala Sarah seihen minayin. How do we know the next level? Again, there was an Isra on the Bitoi. There's an Isra on the co-wife, the Tzara. Isra on the Sarah. How do we know? Amrit ma'achais isha miyuchadashi erva. Again, achais isha is an erva. V'chavan al zdei nekar is ashigas achatas. And what's the resultant when you have these three things? The three things being a shogig is a chatas, the mezid is a kares, and it's an erva. What is the resultant is vasur liyam, can't do yibam, and b'tzarasa asura. Avkol she erva, number one, v'chavan zoni kares, number two, v'shigas achatas, vasur liyabim, tzarasa asura. Mikan amru, from here, what do we see? Chachamim say the rabbanon chaneish asvinashim paitrais, not only they, saraysein, b'saras, saraysein, melchlitzim, and yibam, and that is the limit of the Mishnah. That is how we see that whenever you have these three entities, the Shogig is karis, the mezid is karis, and the shogig is chatos. And there's an isser yibam, the tsarais, and the tsaras are aser ad soif ha'olam until the end of the world. Says the Gemara, and we'll conclude with this: Yochel shani marba av shisha arayis chamuros. Perhaps I should also include 6 other arayis, which are more chamer, more direct relations, arayis that we're going to have a relationship not only to, let's call it the father, not only halves. The Mishnah had a lot of halves, half sister, half brother, etc. But if it was a full brother or sister, the shisha rayis, the 6 very severe rayis melu, and I would have thought that their co-wives are forbidden. Amrit machais ishtam yuchadeshi erva. So now we conclude the drashis. Achis ishta is an erva. And here's the clincher that we're adding on. You're able to marry the brother. Why are you able to marry the brother? Because it's only a half sister, a half brother. So the other brother you're able to marry because you're not related to them. And yet, so too, of course, she erva v'chemen al zdenikaris al shekes chatas actually not say la'achem asur liyamin zaras asura. But these shisha rayas chamuros yatsu shisha rayas chamuros kielu hoyel the ef surely not la'achem zaras saying mutarais shein tzara ella me'ach, because the tzara only comes from the brother. And we're going to pick it up. I think we have and we're going to pick it up. Mirz Hashem from the Azhara Shamanu, but Oynesh Minayim, what's the punishment tomorrow? B'siyata Dishmayo.